Being a leader is not about what you want. Being a good leader is about playing your role in the drama and unfolding of history. Women who do not work usually do not feel fulfilled. The quote is actually time. Time is death. As long as we live in time, we go through cycles of death, destruction, rebirth, right? And flourishing. And then abundance. And then again, death, right? So that's actually what the quote is about. The quote is about the fact that we do not decide the time in which we are born.
Hey listeners, welcome to 10x Growth Strategies podcast. This is your host, Preethy Padmanabhan, technology executive, investor, and board member. Today, we will feature the Indian epic Mahabharata, which is authored by Sage Vyasa. According to legend, Vyasa is both the author and a character within the epic. Our guest today is Tatyana Mamut, co-founder and CEO of Wayfound. She was the board director and chair of Comp Committee for User Testing's IPO on NYSE. She's a leader and builder of successful new products and businesses at Nextdoor, Amazon, Salesforce, IDEO, and Pendo. She has 15 patents and patents pending for technology inventions, including 5 for generational AI innovation. Welcome, Tatyana, to 10x Growth Strategies podcast.
Hello, I'm excited to be here.
Tell us about yourself. Tell us a summary of your career, your personal journey in leadership.
Yeah, I was born in Kharkiv, Ukraine, in the Soviet Union. At the time in the Soviet Union, my family lived in a one-room communal apartment, meaning we did not have a private bathroom. We had no private kitchen. We had to share a bathroom and a kitchen with about 7 other families. And when I was 4 years old, we immigrated as refugees, as political refugees to the United States. Today, I'm living in San Francisco. I am fairly successful, more successful than I could have ever imagined. And I am living my dream life as a technology executive, now as a founder, as a mom in San Francisco of 2 beautiful girls. And I am so grateful every day for my life and really excited to share how I think all of us as leaders can feel abundance and plenty and really feel so fulfilled in our lives, which I feel every day. And that's one of the reasons I'm excited to be here. But my journey is really one of finding myself, finding my place, and cultivating gratitude for the incredible abundance that the world has to offer every single one of us if we lean into it and understand how to access that abundance. So that's a little bit about me.
Wow. Abundance and fulfillment. I love the theme that we are going with on this podcast. And I'm so impressed and amazed by your journey from Ukraine and where you are now, leader across so many companies and also giving back to the society. Thank you. Thank you for doing that and being a role model and inspiration for so many of us. Let us talk about the book, Mahabharata. Tell us about what is the Mahabharata because many of our listeners may not know about it.
This is actually a very abbreviated version of the Mahabharata. It is a classic epic, that is really at the root of many of the different Hindu traditions. And what it really is to me, I studied yoga. I studied to be a yoga teacher, and we all, were very inspired by the Bhagavad Gita in yoga teacher training. And the Bhagavad Gita is a small part of the Mahabharata. And it is the part that focuses on yoga and spiritual practice, which is why so many people know it in the West today. Obviously, Oppenheimer very famously quoted the Bhagavad Gita as well, and that's why a lot of people in the West, in the Western tradition, know it. But to me, it was interesting. I was inspired to read the whole thing. And it's very hard to read the whole thing. As you can see, that's why I got the abbreviated version and flip through it. But there are so many incredible insights about human nature, about life, about our journey on earth, about what a lifetime should, how a lifetime should be lived. And I think that wisdom is one of the reasons why it is so deeply rooted in a lot of Eastern traditions, and especially in a lot of the Indian traditions, why it's at the root of so many different spiritual practices in India, and how it has inspired every single person that has found it, I think has been inspired deeply to understand and see their lives in a different way, through a different lens. And that's why I think it's so meaningful. And that it certainly has had that impact on me. And that's why I'm excited to talk about it today.
Wonderful. Well, I think you summarized it beautifully, and you also shared some of the key tenets and some of the subtext with respect to Bhagavad Gita, which we'll talk about shortly. And I chose to read a much more pictorial version of the book. In fact, there is a children's edition of the Mahabharata. And in fact, growing up, we used to have the Mahabharata epic as a series on TV. So that ended up being a more entertaining way of knowing about the epic. So that is my introduction to Mahabharata. And you said you got introduced to it by hearing about you through yoga and Oppenheimer. So tell me, what inspired you to choose to read the book?
That's an interesting question because at a point, it was actually a few months ago when I started my CEO journey. About 9 months ago, decided to co-found a company called Wayfound. Decided to be CEO. One of my friends, actually a Reiki master, she told me that I needed to look at different leadership models. And she mentioned Yudhishthira. And that, and she mentioned the name, and I looked it up, and it's the Mahabharata, right? And again, at the time, I didn't even know that it was linked to the Bhagavad Gita. I bought the book off of Amazon. Again, I found one that was highly rated. I tried to get one that wasn't too long, wasn't too short, so I wouldn't miss key pieces. And it's really, then the reason I chose to talk about it today was because it really changed my understanding of leadership. And so I was drawn to it precisely as a book about leadership. And, I had read a lot of things about leadership in the past, and obviously had read a lot of business books. And I've been, because I was an executive who had been coached at these big companies like Amazon and Salesforce and all those types of things, I thought I knew a lot about leadership. And then I read the Mahabharata and I realized, wow, this is truly insightful about what leadership is and how to step into becoming a great leader. So I really picked up the book in order to understand how great leaders really function and what does it mean to go through challenging times. Like being a startup CEO is incredibly challenging. You feel like you're at war, right? Especially in this AI era, leading an AI startup. There's so much competition and there's so much war and there's like so much, there's just so much noise and there's so much to take in and the world is moving so fast. And it's really interesting to understand how the fact that what I'm experiencing and the pressures and the challenges are not new. They were written about hundreds and hundreds of years ago, in the context of an actual war, of course, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but it feels very similar, I have to say, to being a startup CEO. And that's really why I was drawn to the book.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was looking at it from my own journey and my own interest in looking at spiritual leadership and applying it to business, I discovered and lessons that the Mahabharata is so real even now, like you said. That's why it's a forever classic epic. That is why it is relevant even today as it was thousands of years ago. Absolutely. And I'm going to ask you a question which might be like, it's hard to summarize a book that is so vast. But for our audience sake, if you had like a few key takeaways that you can talk about, and then we will spend some more time delving into many of them. Would love to hear what are your key takeaways from the book.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to share three takeaways around leadership that really hit me very hard in reading this book. The first one is understand your role in history. Understand what the world wants you to do as opposed to just what you believe in your ego mind you should be doing. Okay. So that's the first piece. We talk about it as Dharma. Maybe we'll talk about Dharma in a few minutes, but, taking on the role, a role as a leader is more about understanding the role the world needs you to play as opposed to you making up, again, in your ego, what do I want to do? What are my goals and desires? Me, 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 me. You step away from the me and you say, where is the world right now? How is the world evolving? How is it changing? And what is the role that I can play in this evolution, in this incredible drama that is history? So that's the first one, right? Is like, being a leader is not about what you want. Being a good leader is about playing your role in the drama and unfolding of history. The second one, which is related, is get your ego out of the way. If you are stepping into a leadership role, the best leaders eschew the material world, right? They do not focus on their material desires. If you are stepping into a leadership role because you want a big house, or you want a yacht, or you want a bunch of second homes, or you want status, you're probably going to be a bad leader. And you're probably going to make a lot of people around you miserable. And eventually, probably you will be miserable. That is not the route to happiness, right? Stepping into leadership for material or status purposes is not the path to happiness. So that's the second takeaway. And there are some amazing quotes I've outlined and highlighted that I would love to share here. And then the third one is that every leader has a critical downfall or several critical problems. And we need, as leaders, to be very self-aware of our weaknesses, of the things that draw us in, of our challenges, because those things can go very, very wrong. And, Yudhishthir, like, he made a really, really, really bad mistake that caused great suffering for himself and his whole family because he was not self-aware of his own personal failing. So there is a lesson for all of us, right? He's not this like perfect leader. He's a leader who is extraordinarily human and extraordinarily imperfect. And at one point, he is like just caught up, right, in his own ego desires and his own bad habits. And, in his case, it was gambling, and he gambles away everything, right? And causes so much pain and suffering to his family and himself. And, to me, that is a very important part of the story, because as a leader, you always have to cultivate self-awareness and check, right? Am I doing this because out of my own bad habits? Or am I doing this, right, because it is the right thing to do? So would be my three big takeaways.
Love it. It's amazing how you codified such a huge epic into three life lessons. And it's certainly hit home for me because those are things I need to keep reminding myself to practice day in and day out. Know what the world wants us to do as a leader, leave ego out the door, and also learn from failures through self awareness. Let's unpack some more of that. I want to introduce a new term here for the audience from the Mahabharata, what is called Dharma or duty or righteousness or moral law. It plays a central role influencing the decisions, conflicts, and fates of the characters. Dharma is not a rigid set of rules, but a complex and context sensitive principle that varies depending on the role, situation, and stage. And we'll get into it shortly, right? Because throughout the epic, different characters like Yudhishthir grapple with their understanding of Dharma, including another person called Arjuna. And because it's sometimes ambiguous and difficult to make the right decisions that are ethical in the world, right and wrong are not always clear. And that's also relevant in our modern day leadership. You mentioned Yudhishthir, who's also named as Dharma. Tell us how you see leadership and Dharma defined and portrayed in the Mahabharata.
Thank you for that. I didn't even know that piece, Preeti, because again, I don't, speak any of the languages. So that's amazing. If you could add more insights, that would be great. So for me, it's interesting because Dharma, you're right. It's the duty. It's the moral law. I interpret it as well as work. So what is our duty, right? It is the work that we take on, right? So in the case of Arjuna, right, his work was actually leading, this great battle and, that was his job, right? His job that the universe wanted him to accomplish was to lead this battle. His ego, though, said, I don't want to do this. And so for me, what's really interesting is reinterpreting our work that we do as Dharma, as our Dharma. And that means your actual job. Like if your actual job you don't feel is your Dharma, if you don't feel that the work that you are doing, that you are probably spending at least 8 hours a day doing, most of us more like 12 or 14 hours a day, right? If that time, if you are not actually performing something that you feel is your duty and is righteous with almost half of your lifetime, more than half if you think about sleep, right? More than half of your waking hours in your entire life will be about your job. Why are you doing it? And I think that by rephrasing your job or your work as your Dharma, I think that forces people or that inspires people to really step back and say, what am I doing and why? And do I truly feel that this is fulfilling the duty that I have to the world? Not just to my family, right? A lot of people feel or reinterpret duty as I have a duty to my family to earn the most money possible. But that is a condition that society has put on us. I think if you go really deep inside yourself, there are probably many ways, right, that you can fulfill that precondition or that condition to your family in many different work pursuits. And the question is, which one do you feel truly and authentically allows you to fulfill your Dharma? And for me, that is really important for all of us as professionals to ask. There's also, if I can bring in Bertrand Russell, in his book on happiness, he really talks about work as one of the main components of happiness. And when we don't understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, or if we don't feel that there is fulfilling work that we are doing or that we are contributing to the world, most people who feel that the work that they're doing is not contributing to the world end up being pretty unhappy. And one of the things he says, he actually wrote in his book in the, I think it was 1920s or 1930s, that, it is an absolute tragedy that a lot of women in the early 20th century weren't working. Because he said women who do not work usually do not feel fulfilled. Right? And so it is really important for each one of us to really deeply feel inside ourselves, like, what is my duty? And here, if I can, read a little, like one of the quotes from the Mahabharata. So here, Yudhishthir is, thinking about and trying to decide, what should he be doing after the war has concluded, and how to be a good leader now after this war. And it says, and here you can stay. And then he gets a piece of advice. He says, stand firm on this knowledge, O Yudhishthir, and do your duty. Before that, it says, that all beings are underlying spiritual entities, and that this material world is nothing more than a temporary illusion, and that the primary aim of life is to seek spiritual emancipation. Stand firm with this knowledge, O Yudhishthir, and do your duty. So here, I think what is happening is that, again, if you feel inside yourself, your happiness does not come from the size of your house. It does not come from, how nice your clothes are. It does not come from how nice your car is. It comes from a feeling deep inside that you have a purpose in life, a spiritual purpose. You don't have to be religious this is not a particularly religious point of view, right? But if you feel that there's something other than just matter and electrons moving around in your brain, if you think that you're somehow different, right, than a machine, right, you have to acknowledge that there is some spark of life, some spirit that differentiates things that are alive versus just material things that move autonomously on their own. And so tapping into that realization and tapping into that spirit and doing the duty that allows us to all feel our spirit is the path to happiness.
Beautiful. I think that comes from so much of self realization and self awareness on your part that you've thought through all this and made it clear for yourself. And it's like to have that sense of purpose to then tie it to your true greater good for the world. It's something every leader needs to do. And not only that, as leaders, we also have to help our organizations to be able to do that, because if our reports and our teams are not able to tie to that purpose, then they will also not be happy and fulfilled, like you said. So this is so much that I'm taking away from your inputs here. We talked about Arjuna briefly, and you also mentioned about his dharma and his duty to be to fight the war. And even though it was about killing other kin, and he was having moral anguish over that, and that's what led to the famous discourse of Bhagavad Gita that you also mentioned that Oppenheimer introduced to the Western world. And in that Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna teaches him about one's own duty and the importance of fulfilling one's responsibilities without attachment to the results, and thereby aligning to the higher cosmic order, or what you talked about as the greater good. What are some key lessons you gain from reading about Arjuna?
Yeah. So one of the things about the Oppenheimer quote is it sounds really awful, right? I have now become death, the destroyer of worlds. And actually reading this book, it's different. That's not the actual quote. They're talking, I mean, it might be the actual quote, but the context is missing. The context is time. Time is death. They're actually talking about creative destruction. And so, what for me is really important here is that when you are doing your Dharma, when you are fulfilling, right, whatever work that you are meant to do, and it's really feeding your spirit. And by the way, the way that you know that it's feeding your spirit is that you don't spend more than 2 or 3 days dreading waking up and getting out of bed and going to work. That to me is the litmus test. If I every day, I literally wake up every day really happy and excited to work every day. Now, there are some days like this morning, it was raining and I wanted to stay in bed a little bit more and I went to bed late and those types of things. And so, physically I wasn't feeling great, but spiritually I feel really excited. And that spiritual excitement does not come from being attached to the outcomes. You know, we're a small startup. Our chances of, succeeding or failing are statistically not great. I believe that they're probably great for us, but, I think you have to have that optimism as a founder. So you cannot be attached. The outcome cannot be the source of that feeling of deep fulfillment and happiness.
Absolutely.
And so back to the quote. The quote is actually time. Time is death. As long as we live in time, we go through cycles of death, destruction, rebirth, right? And flourishing and abundance. And then again, death, destruction, then rebirth, regrowth, and then abundance, and then again, death, right? So that's actually what the quote is about. The quote is about the fact that we do not decide the time in which we are born. And so our job is to play our role and to feel excited and fulfilled in playing the role that we are meant to play at this particular moment in time. And if it is a time of destruction, if it is a time of death, we need to also feel fulfilled and accept that. And so that to me is really important to say, whatever happens, as long as I know that I am playing my role and I feel deeply, content about that role, the outcome is what it is meant to be for the world, right? And that is a really important lesson as well, because so many people get really upset when the outcome isn't what they wanted. And again, when you say the outcome isn't what I wanted, it's your ego again getting involved. The outcome may be exactly what the world needed, but it may not have been what you wanted. And that still has to be awesome.
Yes, that particular frame of life and that way of looking at life as a happening, and that whatever is happening is you're not going to be affected by the outcome. That has really taught me a lot. I can share a personal example. A couple of jobs ago, when I got laid off, it was a PE exit, and all the leaders were slowly being let go. And it was inevitable. But then, when it hit me as the first time I was being let go, and I really then recollected all of this, And in hindsight, that was actually a blessing in disguise, because I got a role into a company called Freshworks just right before my current job, and that took my career to the next level. So while things may not be evident initially, and the world will unfold its mystery as we move along. But that whole lesson you mentioned, not being attached to the outcome or result, can give us that strength every moment, and help us attract the abundance. Because when our frame of mind is all about gratitude, I have certainly experienced that myself personally.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, I do know some people who try to figure out every single bad thing that happens to them. Why did this happen? What is the lesson I'm supposed to learn? I actually don't think that's very helpful, because again, you get into your own ego about what is the lesson I am supposed to learn. Sometimes things just happen. And like in your situation, I have seen so many people, including myself too, where I lost a job that was not my intention. It was not my preference. I was upset about it, but the world, the universe had another plan for me. So, and if I had like thought about it, about like, what is losing my job supposed to teach me? I wouldn't have gotten very far, because it's only in retrospect, after years and years have passed, can you even understand what that was all about, right? Or feel grateful for it. So, one of the things is like, just go with the flow again. And as long as you are waking up feeling grateful and happy, most days, things are going right. And if you are not feeling that way, it's probably something that is misaligned with your spirit. This is what I found, that I used to be like a very depressed person. And, I suffered with, depression ever since I was a teenager. Lots of things happened in my childhood that were really like not good, like really not good. And I just kept thinking about these things, and they were, torturing me. And there was, I was on Prozac for a while and all these things. And what I realized is that the reason I was so tortured, the reason I was depressed, the reason I was anxious is because I did not feel that spark inside myself. I was not aligned with my Dharma. I was not aligned with my purpose. And that misalignment caused all of these issues and all of these problems, right? And that alignment with purpose, just like really like not, things still go wrong, but I'm pretty happy like all the time now, like in a deeply contented way. And so I would say that is really what leaders need to, ask themselves is, and look around at the people that you are leading. Right? Do they feel the spark and the joy in what they're doing at work? Do they feel deeply aligned? And when I interview people, I really try to understand whether this job and whether this role will align with something that they feel inside themselves. That's the other piece of it, because I don't want to be working with people who, even if they're high performers for the company, are miserable or don't feel that this job or, our goal, our mission is aligned with where they should be headed in their lives. So, that's kind of a long-winded way, but absolutely, like so many people have those stories, but when you're in it, you can't like navel gaze into it and try to figure it out.
Yeah. Now, one of my spiritual teachers, Sri Ravi Shankar, he talks about like doing something like where you're constantly thinking about why did that happen to me is like driving, looking at the rear view mirror. So, so we'd rather look at the whole front, windshield in front of us and not just constantly keep looking at the rear view. So beautiful point there. I want to touch upon the last area you mentioned of among your key takeaways, which is the failure and being able to be self aware to overcome the failure as leaders. Tell us a little bit about that, unpack that for us.
Yeah. Well, in the story, Yudhishthir has a gambling problem, and he likes to gamble. So he gets into he's actually kind of baited into a gambling match, and he loses everything. He loses his kingdom, he loses his family, he loses his wife, and he loses his freedom. He loses everything. And the reason he loses it is because he keeps doubling down, right? It's like a lack of self-awareness that now he's kind of functioning based on his own bad habits as opposed to the higher purpose, the Dharma, right? Like there was not a moment which is like, what does the universe want me to do at this moment, right? It's like, I'm going to double down, I'm going to win. It's like an addiction, right? And so for me, this is one of my challenges, is to constantly see where are my blind spots, what are my bad habits, right? So I am quite a procrastinator. I'm a very high functioning procrastinator. I probably have like undiagnosed ADHD or whatever. There's a lot of things in my life that actually indicate that. But I have like, and I'm a little also like manic depressive. So I'll go like super in, and then I'll just be like leaning out for a while. And this is not great. These are not great traits as a leader, right? Because people need leaders to be consistent and to always know that the leader like has it, right? And is on top of it and is on. So I, have to constantly be aware of how I'm showing up, because I have these traits, right? Which, are probably deeply physical at some level, but that awareness is, and it's challenging, right? But that awareness also allows me to openly talk to my colleagues. It also helps me staff the company in the right way. So one of the first people I hired was a head of business operations, because guess what you can't procrastinate on is like billing and bookkeeping and legal stuff and all like the compliance stuff, right? Like, so I know that is a weakness of mine, right? And so one of my first hires was to help me with that weakness. And the first thing I told him was, I disclosed, I'm really bad at this sort of disciplined, structured thing. So you need to put things on my calendar, and I will not avoid them if they're on my calendar. But if they're not on my calendar, I may avoid them. So please help me get past these weaknesses that I have. And so I think that leaders that try to hide their weaknesses from people are doing themselves a disservice, because people see it or they'll feel it. And they may not know that you're self-aware. So I try to be really self-aware and really transparent about the things that I know I'm bad at. Do I try to change them? I mean, I think I would probably spend way too much effort and energy trying to change those things about myself versus putting structures in place to kind of work around them and still be successful. That's my own personal opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're focusing on your strengths. That is certainly a great strategy. And also, I loved what you shared. You were being vulnerable. And by doing that, you gave permission for the other person to also come forward. Then you have much more closer relationship as leaders and of the organization. I love that. I think that's certainly something all of us can practice in our lives and our leadership. Any final words of wisdom for the audience, Tatyana?
Well, I mean, the main thing I would say is, especially for people who are thinking about being entrepreneurs or founders, but it's really for everyone. I think it's harder to be a founder and not feel that deep, fulfillment inside yourself, that you're fulfilling and doing something that the world wants, not just something that you want. My last thing would be that, my life changed when I started to have that perspective. My life really changed when it was no longer a status game, when it was no longer about, I was much more motivated by status than by money, personally, because, I came from nothing. So I'm pretty confident I could live on almost nothing. So like that money doesn't really motivate me very much, but status definitely motivated me. Once I got out of that and I started to kind of really focus on the larger drama in the world, um, and the larger unfolding of history and the role that I can play in it, man, it has become so much more fun to be a leader. It's been so much more fulfilling, right? To have people working for me. I never really enjoyed having people work for me because I didn't really want to be responsible for other people. Like, I just didn't want that sort of burden or that responsibility. But now it's like, it's not me, right? That's taking on this responsibility. It's something that the world needs. We're creating something that is part of the larger evolution of the world. And in our case, it's around AI agents and artificial intelligence emerging, right? And the role that we are playing in helping people understand what's happening in that technology and, you know, what their AI agents are doing. And every single day I feel truly fulfilled, right? In this work that I'm doing. If you don't feel that, don't do it. I know it might sound like, well, that's ridiculous. She's, you know, she doesn't realize what it's like to, you know, have a family and be responsible. I do. I am the primary breadwinner in my family, and I've got 2 kids, and I live in San Francisco, and they have to go to private school. So trust me, I get it. But the world is filled with much more abundance than you realize. And once you step into being truly happy and doing your work from a standpoint of my work is my Dharma, I promise things will line up. You may not become a billionaire. That's not what this is. This is not like a God wants you to be rich kind of like story, by the way, because in the fact, Yudhishthir ends up dying by choice in a very poor, you know, condition, right? In a very, very tough, he chooses a very hard life in the end, even though he could have stayed in his kingdom and eaten grapes all day long, right? So that's not what it's about. It's not like you're going to be a billionaire if you just follow your Dharma. That's not what it's about. But you will be happy, and you will be much happier than if you were just become a billionaire. So that's the thing that this book taught me, and that I hope, you know, people will, you know, read the picture book, or there's YouTube videos that you can watch about this, or go to a lecture or a spiritual teacher that is inspired by the Mahabharata. But it's really, I truly, truly hope leaders feel their spirit and feel their soul when they are doing their work.
What a great message to finish with. Thank you so much, Tatyana. It was a wonderful conversation and a wonderful episode here for us. Listeners, check out the book, Mahabharata, and thank you for tuning in today.